On a foggy morning outside a construction site, a humble black diner owner stood in quiet thought until she suddenly noticed a hungry boy at her window. Although she had little herself, she welcomed him with a full plate of food, unaware that a billionaire was silently watching and that what happened next would change her life forever. Before we dive in, what time are you listening and where are you tuning in from? Drop a comment below and tell us. I'd love to know.
The morning was heavy with fog, the kind that lingered low to the ground and wrapped itself around the half-finished steel beams of the construction site across the street. The sound of hammers and drills hadn't started yet. The city still seemed half asleep, yawning as car headlights cut slow paths through the mist. At the corner of the block stood a little diner. Its paint was chipped, the neon sign buzzed weakly, and the door creaked whenever it opened, but inside it carried something that most glass towers and fancy restaurants couldn't buy: warmth. The smell of butter on the grill, fresh biscuits, and brewed coffee hung in the air like an unspoken promise. No matter who you were, if you came inside you'd leave fed and a little less alone. That diner belonged to Martha Johnson, a black woman in her late 40s. Life had never been easy for her. She'd been a single mother, a caregiver, and now a business owner trying to keep her little dream alive in a world that often seemed to have no patience for small dreams. The diner wasn't much, but it was hers. She had bought it after years of saving from her janitorial job, and though she was barely breaking even, she poured every ounce of love she had into it. That foggy morning, Martha stood by the window with a towel in her hands, wiping away streaks of condensation. Her reflection stared back at her, eyes tired but not broken. She sighed, wondering how she'd stretch the week's groceries to make enough pies, sandwiches and platters to feed whoever walked in. Just then, she noticed movement outside. A small figure hovered near the glass, hesitant, half hidden in the mist. She squinted. A boy, no older than 10, maybe 11, stood there in a tattered hoodie, shoes scuffed and too small for his feet. His cheeks were sunken, his eyes wide with a hunger that went beyond food. He pressed his little nose against the glass for a second, then pulled back quickly as if ashamed of being caught looking. Martha's heart clenched. She knew that look. She'd seen it in her own child's eyes years ago, when times had been so bad that dinner had been a slice of bread split in half. She opened the door and stepped outside. "Hey, baby," she said softly, not wanting to scare him. "Are you hungry?" The boy hesitated, shifting on his feet. I was just... His voice trailed off, too weak to hold a lie. Martha knelt down so her eyes met his. "Don't worry. You don't have to explain nothing. Come on. In, let's get you something to eat." He looked at her, uncertain, but the kindness in her voice melted a little of his fear. Slowly he nodded. Inside, Martha guided him to a booth by the window and poured him a glass of water. "What's your name, sweetheart?" "Eli," he said after a pause, as if remembering it himself. "Well, Eli, you sit right there. I'll fix you up something real good." She went into the kitchen, cracked 2 eggs on the skillet, dropped bacon strips onto the hot surface and flipped pancakes until the smell filled the whole diner. She piled it all onto a plate and set it in front of him. The boy stared at the food as though it might disappear if he blinked. Then, almost trembling, he picked up the fork and dug in. Each bite was fast, desperate, but filled with relief. Martha sat across from him, smiling gently. She didn't rush him. She just watched a boy reclaiming something he should never have lost: dignity in being cared for. What Martha didn't know was that across the street, through the fog, someone else was watching. At the edge of the construction site sat a sleek, black car with tinted windows. Inside, behind the glass, sat Richard Hale, one of the richest men in the city. A billionaire, known for building skyscrapers, buying companies, and throwing parties where champagne cost more than most people's rent. But for all his money, Richard was a man who rarely felt truly seen. His wealth put walls around him, walls no one dared cross with genuine kindness. That morning, while waiting for a meeting with the construction foreman, he'd grown restless and looked out the car window. That's when he noticed the little diner and the boy outside its glass. He'd seen countless people walk past homeless kids without a second glance. But this woman, the owner of the diner, didn't look away. She didn't brush him off, she brought him in, fed him, and treated him like a child instead of a burden. Something stirred in Richard that he hadn't felt in years. He told his driver to wait and stepped out of the car, pulling his coat tighter against the chill. He didn't go inside right away. He just stood outside, watching through the window as Martha topped off the boy's glass of water and offered him a smile like a mother would. Inside, Eli had finally slowed down, his belly full. Tears welled in his eyes as he whispered, "Thank you, Mom. Nobody's ever done this for me before." Martha reached across the table, resting her hand gently on his. "Everybody deserves a warm meal, Eli. You remember that. You're not invisible, baby. You matter." The boy broke down then, sobbing quietly, and Martha just let him. She knew sometimes tears were the only way the soul could breathe. From outside, Richard Hale's throat tightened. For the first time in years, he didn't feel like a billionaire or a businessman. He felt like a man remembering what humanity was supposed to look like. When Eli finally calmed, Martha asked where he lived. He mumbled something about no home, about sleeping near the bus station since his mother had gotten sick and he hadn't seen her in weeks. Martha's chest ached. She wanted to do more, but she already struggled to keep the lights on. Still, she refused to let the boy walk back into the cold. She packed him a small bag of food, biscuits wrapped in foil, a thermos of soup and an apple, and pressed it into his hands. "Take this, and you come back tomorrow, you hear me? You'll always have something to eat here." Eli nodded, clutching the bag like it was treasure. That's when the door chimed and Richard Hale stepped inside. His presence filled the room instantly, not because he wanted it to, but because wealth and power had a way of announcing themselves. He was tall, sharply dressed, and carried himself with the air of someone who could buy the whole block if he wished. Martha looked up, surprised. "Good morning, sir. You want a table?" Richard smiled faintly. "Actually, I'd like some coffee, black." She nodded and poured him a cup. He sat at the counter, watching her move. Finally, he said, "I saw what you did for that boy, Martha." Paused, unsure if he was about to criticize her for letting a homeless child inside. He was hungry. That's all that matters. "That's all that matters," Richard repeated softly, as if testing the words on his own tongue. They spoke. Little more. Richard finished his coffee, left $100 bill on the counter, and walked out. Martha tried to call after him, "Sir, this is too much." But he only lifted his hand in silent farewell and disappeared into the fog. For days, nothing happened. Martha went back to her routine. Early mornings, frying eggs, serving coffee to construction workers, truck drivers, and the occasional passerby. Eli came back every morning, sometimes with a shy smile, sometimes with new stories of where he'd slept. She kept feeding him, no questions asked. Then, 1 week later, the change came. That morning, Martha arrived to find the diner surrounded by trucks. Not construction trucks, but delivery trucks. Pallets of food, brand new kitchen equipment, even a sparkling new sign with her diner's name etched in gold letters were being unloaded. Confused, she ran inside, where a man in a suit was waiting with papers. "Mrs. Johnson?" he asked. "Yes." "These are from Mr. Richard Hale. He's made a full donation to upgrade your diner. New equipment, supplies, and a year's worth of inventory, all paid for, and..." The man handed her a thick envelope. "He's also established a community fund in your name. He said your kindness inspired him." Martha's hands shook as she opened the envelope. Inside was a check, more zeros than she had ever seen in her life. Enough to not just save her diner, but to expand it, to feed more people like Eli, to keep her dream alive forever. Her knees buckled, and she sat down hard on a chair, tears spilling down her cheeks. "Why me?" she whispered. The man smiled. "Because you gave when you had little. He said the world needs more people like you." Outside, Eli ran up to the diner, his face lighting up at the sight of all the trucks. Martha pulled him close, holding him as tightly as if he were her own son. She knew then that life had changed forever, not just for her, but for every hungry soul who would walk through those doors. And somewhere in a glass tower high above the city, Richard Hale looked out his window and smiled quietly, knowing that, for once, his wealth had been used exactly where it belonged. In the end, it wasn't the billionaire's money that changed everything. It was Martha's small act of kindness, a plate of food, a soft word, a reminder to a little boy that he mattered. That set everything into motion, because sometimes the smallest kindness can spark the biggest miracles.